Taemin pulled the access panel open and checked the wiring behind it. Everything looked fine, just like it had yesterday and the day before. The maintenance corridor in Haven's Gate Station never had real problems. Most days, he just walked through, scanned the systems, and confirmed that everything worked properly. It was boring work, but Taemin did not mind boring. Boring meant safe, and safe was good when you lived in a metal box floating in space. He closed the panel and marked it in his datapad. The corridor was quiet except for the soft hum of the air recyclers. This section belonged to the residential wing where the alien diplomats lived with their families. Humans had only joined the Galactic Assembly 3 months ago, so most of the residents here were not human. Taemin had learned to recognize the different species by their footsteps. The Quilix made clicking sounds with their 6 legs. The Centaurans walked heavily because of their size. The Vraxi moved with quick, light steps that reminded him of cats. Something moved at the edge of his vision. Taemin turned his head slowly and saw a small figure duck behind a support beam. He recognized the dark red skin and the ridge of small spines along the head. A Vraxi cub. This was not the first time Taemin had seen the young one watching him. For the past week, the cub had appeared whenever Taemin worked in this corridor. The little Vraxi never came close, just watched from a distance and then disappeared when Taemin looked directly at him. Taemin went back to his work. He moved to the next panel and opened it. From the corner of his eye, he could see the cub peeking around the beam. The young Vraxi held something in his small clawed hands. It looked like a carved piece of wood or bone, shaped like a bird with spread wings. Taemin had seen other Vraxi cubs carrying similar toys. Bo-Ra, the human xenobiologist who sometimes worked with him, had explained that these toys were called strikers. They were traditional Vraxi hunting tools made small for children. Every Vraxi cub received one as a gift, and they were supposed to carry it with pride. But this cub did not look proud. He looked worried. He clutched the toy against his chest and kept glancing down the corridor as if afraid someone might see him. Taemin pretended not to notice and continued his inspection. After a few minutes, the cub moved closer. Not much closer, just a few steps. Taemin could see the toy more clearly now. One of the wings was broken. It hung at an odd angle, attached by only a thin piece of material that looked ready to snap completely. The cub noticed Taemin looking and immediately hid the toy behind his back. His large yellow eyes went wide, and his small spines flattened against his head. Taemin recognized the expression. He had seen the same look on his nephew's face once, when the boy had broken his grandfather's old watch. It was the look of a child who knew something precious was damaged and did not know how to fix it. Taemin offered a small smile and went back to his panel. He did not want to scare the cub away. After a moment, the young Vraxi relaxed slightly. The cub's spines lifted a bit and he brought the toy back to his chest. He looked down at the broken wing with such sadness that Taemin felt something tighten in his own chest. The maintenance check finished, and Taemin packed his tools. The cub watched every movement. When Taemin started walking down the corridor, the small Vraxi did not follow. Instead, he moved to a small alcove near one of the panels. The space was barely large enough for a child, hidden behind a decorative plant that the station crew had installed to make the corridors look less industrial. The cub looked around carefully, making sure no one was watching. Then he placed the broken toy gently into the alcove, pushing it back into the shadows where it could not be seen easily. The young Vraxi's hands lingered on the toy for a moment, as if he did not want to leave it. Then he pulled away and hurried down the corridor in the opposite direction. Taemin stood still, pretending to check his datapad. When the cub disappeared around the corner, Taemin walked over to the alcove. He did not touch the toy, just looked at it. The broken wing had clearly snapped recently. The break was clean, not worn down by time. The rest of the toy showed careful craftsmanship. Someone had spent hours carving the details into the surface. Taemin returned to his rounds, but his mind stayed on the cub and the broken toy. He finished checking the other corridors and then went to find Bo-Ra. She was in the xenobiology lab studying some samples under a microscope. She looked up when Taemin entered. "You look worried," Bo-Ra said. "Did something break?" "Not exactly," Taemin replied. He explained what he had seen. Bo-Ra listened and then sat back in her chair. "That is difficult," she said. "Vraxi culture is very strict about showing weakness. They are a warrior species and they raise their children to be strong and independent. A broken possession, especially something as important as a striker toy, would be seen as a failure. But he is just a child," Taimin said. "To the Vraxi, that does not matter. Cubs are expected to take care of their belongings. If the toy broke, the cub probably feels ashamed. He cannot ask for help because that would mean admitting he was not strong enough to prevent the damage or skilled enough to fix it himself." Taimin thought about this. What about his parents? Would they not help? Bo-Ra shook her head. "Vraxi, parents are loving, but they show love differently than humans do. They would expect the cub to handle the problem alone. Asking for help with something like this would disappoint them. The cub would rather hide the broken toy than face that disappointment." "That seems harsh," Taimin said quietly. "It is their way," Bo-Ra replied. "They believe struggle makes cubs stronger. And to be fair, their species has survived for thousands of years with this approach. We cannot judge their culture by human standards." Taimin nodded, but something still bothered him. "Do you know which family the cub belongs to? Based on your description and the location, it is probably Kip, the son of diplomat Rixtal. The diplomat is one of the senior Vraxi representatives here. He has a reputation for being very traditional and very strict. His mate died a few years ago, so he is raising Kip alone." That information made Taimin feel even worse. A child who had already lost one parent, now struggling alone with a broken toy that probably meant a great deal to him. Taimin thanked Bo-Ra and left the lab. He returned to his quarters and tried to focus on other things, but his thoughts kept returning to the small alcove and the hidden toy. That evening, Taimin ate dinner in the station cafeteria. The large room held dozens of species, all eating their own preferred foods at different tables. Humans mostly sat with other humans, though some had begun making friends with other species. Taimin usually ate alone. He preferred quiet. Tonight, he saw Rixtal enter with Kip. The Vraxi diplomat was tall and lean, with darker red skin than his son. His spines were larger and sharper, and he moved with the controlled grace of someone trained in combat. Kip followed close behind his father, his head down and his hands empty. Other Vraxi cubs in the cafeteria carried their striker toys openly, showing them off to each other. Kip had nothing. Rixtal noticed and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. The gesture looked firm but not unkind. He said something too quiet for Taimin to hear. Kip nodded and straightened his posture, trying to look confident. But Taimin could see the sadness in the cub's eyes. Taimin finished his meal and left the cafeteria. He walked back to the residential corridor and stood in front of the alcove. The toy was still there, hidden in the shadows. Taimin looked around. The corridor was empty. He reached into the alcove and carefully picked up the broken striker. The carved surface felt smooth under his fingers. The broken wing hung loose, ready to fall off completely at any moment. Taimin held the toy for a long moment, thinking. Bo-Ra's words echoed in his mind. Different cultures, different ways. The Vraxi believed children should be strong and independent. They believed struggle built character. But Taimin thought about his own childhood. He remembered his grandfather's workshop, the smell of wood and glue, the patient hands showing him how to fix things that seemed beyond repair. His grandfather had taught him that there was no shame in something breaking. The shame was in not caring enough to make it whole again. Taimin made his decision. He tucked the toy carefully into his jacket and walked toward his workshop. The taller corridor stayed empty behind him, and in the alcove only shadows remained. Taimin waited until the station entered its night cycle. The corridors dimmed to a soft glow that mimicked twilight. Most residents had returned to their quarters for sleep or rest. The maintenance areas stayed lit, but few people came here during these hours. Taimin's workshop occupied a small room near the engineering section. It smelled like metal and oil, with tools hanging on the walls and work tables covered with various projects. He placed the broken striker toy on his main work table under a bright light. Up close, the damage looked worse than he had thought. The wing had not just cracked, It had snapped cleanly through a joint mechanism. The toy was not simply carved wood. It had moving parts inside that allowed the wings to fold and extend, mimicking the hunting tools that adult Vraxi carried. Someone had put incredible skill into making this small replica work just like the real thing. Timon examined the break carefully. The material was not wood, though it looked like it. He ran a scanner over it and checked the results. The material came from a plant that grew on the Vraxi homeworld. It had properties similar to earth bamboo, but with a different grain structure. He did not have any of this material in his workshop. The station did not stock it because humans had no use for it, and the Vraxi brought very little of it to Haven's Gate. He sat back and thought. He could not replicate the exact material, but he had other options. Earth had many types of wood and synthetic materials that might work. The key was matching the color, weight, and grain pattern closely enough that the repair would not be obvious. Timon pulled up the station archives on his datapad and searched for information about Vraxi craftsmanship. The archives held detailed files on every species in the Galactic Assembly. The section on Vraxi culture included information about their traditional arts. Striker toys were more than just playthings. They represented a cub's first step toward becoming a hunter. Families passed down the techniques for making them through generations. Each toy was unique, carved specifically for the cub who would carry it. The files mentioned that strikers often came from a parent or grandparent, making them deeply personal gifts. Timon thought about Kip and his deceased mother. The toy had probably been her gift to her son. That made it irreplaceable in a way that went beyond its physical form. The broken wing was not just broken material. It was a broken connection to someone Kip had lost. This realization made Timon even more determined to do the repair correctly. He stood and walked to his material storage. He had collected various woods and composites over the years, samples from Earth that he kept for personal projects. He pulled out several pieces and compared them under the light. Most were too dark or too light. One piece of maple had almost the right color, but the grain ran in the wrong direction. Another piece of cherry wood had a better grain pattern but weighed too much. Finally, Timon found a piece of birch that had been treated with a red stain. The color was close and the grain pattern had the same flowing lines as the original material. The weight felt right in his hand. He cut a small section and held it next to the broken wing. Not perfect, but good enough that someone would need to look very closely to notice the difference. Timon began the careful work of shaping the replacement wing. He used hand tools rather than machines. Machines were faster, but hand tools gave him more control. His grandfather had taught him that patience produced better results than speed. Timon worked slowly, checking his progress every few minutes. The wing needed to match the original exactly, down to the small decorative grooves carved into the surface. Hours passed. Timon's hands moved steadily, guided by years of practice. He had learned woodworking as a child, sitting beside his grandfather in a workshop much like this one. The old man had repaired furniture, toys, musical instruments, anything people brought to him. He never turned away a job, no matter how small. He taught Timon that fixing things was a way of showing respect. Every object had a story, and repair honored that story. The memory made Timon smile. His grandfather would have liked this task. The old man had believed that broken things deserved second chances, just like people did. By the third night, Timon had shaped the wing perfectly. Now came the difficult part. The wing needed to attach to the body with a joint that allowed it to move. The original joint had broken because the material had weakened over time. Timon needed to create something stronger that would last longer, but still look authentic. He studied the remaining pieces of the original joint. The design was clever. A small pin ran through both the wing and the body, allowing rotation. A tiny spring mechanism inside provided tension to hold the wing in place when extended. Timon could recreate this, but he could also improve it. He had access to modern materials that the original crafter had not used. A small titanium pin would be much stronger than the organic material and would last indefinitely. The pin would hide inside the joint where no one could see it. Timon fabricated the pin using precise tools. He drilled new holes in both the replacement wing and the original body, making sure the alignment was perfect. Then he assembled the joint carefully, testing the movement multiple times. The wing extended and retracted smoothly, even more smoothly than he had expected. The titanium pin eliminated friction that the original material had created. The final challenge was color matching. The new wing looked slightly different from the aged original. Taemin mixed stains and applied them in thin layers, building up the color gradually. He studied the original wing under bright light and in dim light, matching both conditions. He added subtle variations in the stain to mimic the natural patterns in the material. Then he carefully applied a coating that matched the worn finish of the rest of the toy. When he finished, Taemin held the striker under the work light and examined it from every angle. The repair was nearly invisible. Someone who knew the toy well might notice that one wing looked slightly less worn than the other, but they would need to study it carefully. The mechanism worked perfectly, and the replacement wing had the same weight and balance as the original. Taemin set the toy down and stretched. His back ached from hunching over the work table for 3 nights. He looked at the clock and saw that only an hour remained before the station's morning cycle began. He needed to return the toy before people started moving through the corridors. Before leaving his workshop, Taemin did one more thing. He took a soft cloth and cleaned the entire striker, removing dust and fingerprints. He wanted Kip to find it looking cared for, not just repaired. Then he wrapped it carefully in a clean cloth and placed it in his jacket pocket. The corridors were still dim when Taemin reached the residential wing. He moved quietly, listening for any sounds of people waking. Everything remained silent. He walked to the alcove where Kip had hidden the toy and carefully placed it back in the exact position where it had been. He arranged it so the repaired wing was visible, wanting Kip to immediately see that something had changed. Taemin stepped back and looked at the alcove one more time. The striker sat in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. He felt satisfied with his work, not because the repair was difficult or impressive, but because it would make a child happy. That seemed like a good reason to spend 3 nights in a workshop. He returned to his quarters just as the station lights began to brighten for the morning cycle. Taemin showered, changed into clean clothes, and went to the cafeteria for breakfast. He felt tired but content. Bora was already there, drinking coffee and reading something on her datapad. "You look exhausted," she said when Taemin sat down with his food. "Bad night?" "Working on a project," Taemin replied. He did not offer details, and Bora did not ask. She knew him well enough to understand that he would share information when he wanted to. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Bora said, "I heard Diplomat Rixtal is giving a presentation this morning about Vraxi cultural practices. Several humans are attending to learn more about their species. Are you interested?" Taemin shook his head. "I have maintenance rounds to do." "Of course you do," Bora said with a smile. "You always have maintenance rounds." Taemin finished his breakfast and left the cafeteria. He collected his tools and his datapad, then headed back to the residential wing. His rounds would take him past the alcove where Kip had hidden his toy. Taemin was curious to see if the cub had found it yet, but he would not check directly. He would just do his normal work and see what happened. The corridor looked the same as always when Taemin arrived. He started his inspections at the far end and worked his way toward the alcove. He opened panels, checked systems, made notes in his datapad. Everything was routine and normal. He tried not to think about the toy or about Kip finding it. Then he heard quick footsteps behind him. Taemin turned and saw Kip running down the corridor. The small Vraxi cub was headed straight for the alcove. The young one's eyes were wide and his spine stood straight up with excitement or anxiety. Kip reached the alcove and dropped to his knees, reaching into the shadows. Taemin watched from a distance as Kip pulled out the striker toy. The cub froze completely still for several long seconds, just staring at what he held. Then, very carefully, Kip tested the wing mechanism. It extended smoothly. He retracted it. Extended it again. Kip could not stop looking at his striker. He sat in his room with the toy in his lap, extending and retracting the wing over and over. The mechanism worked perfectly. Better than perfect. It moved more smoothly than it ever had before, even when the toy was new. The wing his mother had made for him was whole again, and Kip did not understand how. He knew he had not fixed it himself. The break had been too complete, and he did not have the tools or knowledge to make such a repair. He had not told anyone about the damage. He had been too ashamed to ask for help. So who had done this? The question troubled Kip through the rest of the day. He carried his striker with him like he was supposed to, no longer hiding it. Other Vraxi cubs noticed and made approving sounds. One of them, Vixra, came over to examine the toy more closely. "Your striker looks good," Vixra said. Did you polish it? Kip hesitated, then nodded. It was easier than explaining what had really happened. Vixra lost interest and went back to playing with the other cubs. Kip stood apart from them, thinking. Someone had taken his toy from the hiding place. Someone had repaired it with great skill. Someone had returned it without saying anything. This did not make sense in any way Kip understood. In Vraxi culture, people did not help without being asked. If you needed assistance, you requested it formally, and the person you asked could accept or refuse. But taking someone's possession and fixing it without permission was not done. It suggested the owner was too weak or foolish to care for their own belongings. It was an insult, not a kindness, but Kip did not feel insulted. He felt grateful and confused in equal measure. His mother's gift was whole again. He could carry it with pride instead of shame. Someone had done this for him and he did not even know who. Over the next few days, Kip began investigating. He returned to the alcove during different times and watched the corridor. Many people passed through. Station crew, diplomats, visitors. But one person appeared more often than others. The human maintenance worker. Kip had seen him before, had even watched him work sometimes. The human moved through the corridors quietly, checking panels and systems. He had been there the day Kip hid the broken toy. He had been there every day since. Kip started following the human at a distance. Not closely enough to be obvious, but near enough to observe. The human's name was on his uniform. Taemin. Kip had never spoken to a human before. The Vraxi diplomats said humans were strange. They were new to the Galactic Assembly and did not understand proper behavior yet. But they were not hostile, just different. Taemin seemed to notice Kip watching, but he never acknowledged it directly. He just did his work, occasionally nodding politely when their eyes met. Kip found this frustrating. He wanted to know if Taemin was the one who had repaired the striker, but he did not know how to ask. If Taemin had done it, why? If Taemin had not done it, who had? The questions made Kip's head hurt. He wished his mother was still alive. She would have known what to do. She had always understood things that confused him. But she was gone, and his father was not the kind of person Kip could talk to about confusing feelings. Rixtal expected Kip to be strong and certain, not troubled and full of questions. One evening, Kip sat in their quarters with the striker in his hands. His father was working at his desk reviewing diplomatic documents. Rixtal looked up and saw his son holding the toy. His eyes narrowed slightly. "When did you start carrying your striker again?" Rixtal asked. His voice was neutral, but Kip heard the question beneath the question. His father had noticed the toy missing. Rixtal noticed everything. "I never stopped carrying it," Kip said, which was technically true. He had just been hiding it. Rixtal stood and walked over. He held out his hand, and Kip reluctantly gave him the striker. His father examined it carefully, testing the wing mechanism. Rixtal's expression changed. His spines lifted slightly, a sign of surprise. "This wing was broken," Rixtal said. It was not a question. Kip nodded, his head lowering. He waited for disappointment or anger. Instead, his father's voice remained calm. "Who did you ask to repair it?" "No one," Kip said quietly. "I did not ask anyone." "Then how is it fixed?" "I do not know. I hid it because it was broken and I was ashamed. Then I went back and it was repaired. Someone fixed it without me asking." Rixtal's spines went completely flat. This was a sign of deep thought or concern. He looked at the striker again, turning it over in his hands. "You did not request assistance?" "No, father." "And you do not know who performed this repair?" "I think it might have been the human maintenance worker. He is in that corridor often, but I'm not certain." Rixtal's expression hardened. He handed the striker back to Kip and returned to his desk. He accessed the security system on his terminal. Vraxi diplomats had permission to review recordings from areas near their quarters for safety reasons. Rixtal pulled up the footage from the corridor outside their quarters for the past week. Kip watched nervously as his father reviewed the recordings at high speed. The screen showed people passing through the corridor. Then Rixtal stopped the playback and switched to normal speed. Kip saw himself on the screen, placing the broken striker in the alcove. The image was clear. Timestamps showed this was 5 days ago. Rixtal advanced the recording several hours. The corridor was empty during the night cycle. Then a figure appeared. The human Taemin. He walked to the alcove, looked around, and reached into the shadows. When his hand emerged, he held the broken striker. He examined it briefly, then tucked it into his jacket and walked away. There, Rixtal said, his voice tight. The human took your possession without permission. He continued the playback. 3 days later, in the early morning before the lights brightened, Timon returned. He placed something in the alcove and left quickly. When Kip appeared in the recording hours later and retrieved the striker, his reaction was obvious even on the screen. Joy and confusion mixed together. Rixtal closed the recording and sat back in his chair. His hands formed fists on the desk. Kip recognized his father's anger, though Rixtal was controlling it carefully. The human interfered, Rixtal said. He took your property and performed repairs you did not request. This is inappropriate. But father, he fixed it, Kip said. Mother's gift is whole again. I am grateful. Gratitude is not the point. The point is proper behavior. You should have asked for help if you needed it, or you should have learned to make the repair yourself. The human denied you both options by interfering without invitation. Kip did not know what to say. He understood his father's logic. In Vraxi culture, Rixtal was correct, but Kip's heart did not care about correct behavior. His heart only knew that the striker was fixed and he was happy. Rixtal stood. I will speak to this human tomorrow. He needs to understand boundaries. Please do not be harsh, Kip said quickly. I do not think he meant insult. His intentions are irrelevant. His actions were improper. Rixtal's voice was firm. You may keep the striker. The repair was well done and it would be wasteful to discard it. But this behavior cannot continue unchallenged. That night, Kip could not sleep. He held his striker and thought about what would happen tomorrow. His father would confront Timon. There would be words, maybe formal complaints, maybe worse, all because someone had helped him without being asked. Kip thought about his mother. She had carved this striker with her own hands, spending weeks on the details. She had given it to him the day before she left on the mission that killed her. She had told him the striker would keep part of her with him always. When it broke, Kip felt like he had lost her a second time. When he found it repaired, it was like getting a piece of her back. How could that be wrong? The next morning, Kip followed his father to the residential corridor. Rixtal had his formal diplomatic posture, spine straight and spines raised to full height. Kip trailed behind, dreading what was about to happen. Timon was there, checking a panel like he did every day. He looked up when Rixtal approached. The human's expression remained calm and polite. Maintenance worker Timon, Rixtal said formally. I require a moment of your time. Of course, diplomat, Timon replied. He closed his panel and gave Rixtal his full attention. You took my son's possession 5 days ago. You repaired it without permission or request. I want to know why you interfered in this manner. Timon did not look surprised. He glanced at Kip, who was hiding behind his father's legs. Then he looked back at Rixtal. I saw your son was distressed, Timon said. His voice was quiet and steady. The toy was broken. I have the skills to repair such things. So I repaired it. You were not asked? No, I was not. Then your action was inappropriate. My son needs to learn self-reliance. You denied him that lesson. Timon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with respect, diplomat, your son is a child. Children carry enough burdens without adding unnecessary ones. The toy was precious to him. I could fix it easily. So I did. That is not how Vraxi raise their young, Rixtal said, his voice growing harder. We teach strength through adversity. You undermined that. I understand your culture values independence, Timon replied. But I also saw a child suffering when he did not need to. I made a choice. If that offends you, I apologize. But I would make the same choice again. Rixtal's spines vibrated slightly, a sign of barely controlled anger. The formal complaint sat on Administrator Hai Jin's desk for 2 days before she called the hearing. She was a career diplomat who had worked with dozens of species before humanity joined the Galactic Assembly. She knew that cultural misunderstandings were common and usually manageable. But this complaint from diplomat Rixtal seemed different. It was not about trade disputes or territory boundaries. It was about a broken toy and a kind gesture that had somehow become an incident. Yijin read the complaint 3 times. Rixtal's formal language described Timon's actions as cultural interference and unauthorized handling of private property. The complaint requested disciplinary action and a formal apology. Attached to it were security recordings and a detailed explanation of Vraxi child-rearing practices. Everything was proper and by procedure. Everything was also completely unnecessary in Hai Jin's opinion. but she could not dismiss the complaint without a hearing. Rixtal was a senior diplomat, and his concerns needed to be addressed formally. Heejin sent out notices to all parties. The hearing would be held in the main conference room. Attendance was optional for station residents, but she suspected several species would come to observe. Cultural disputes always attracted attention. She was right. When the hearing began, the conference room held 20 observers from 6 different species. Rixtal sat at one table with another Vraxi diplomat beside him for support. Taemin sat alone at the other table, looking uncomfortable but calm. Bora sat in the observer section, having asked to attend as a witness if needed. Yijin called the hearing to order and asked Rixtal to present his complaint. The Vraxi diplomat stood and spoke clearly, his spine rigid. Maintenance worker Taemin took my son's possession without permission. He performed repairs that were not requested. These actions violate Vraxi cultural practices regarding independence and self-reliance. Our cubs learn strength by managing their own problems. This human interfered with that learning process. His actions, while perhaps well-intended, were inappropriate and disrespectful to our customs. Rixtal sat down. Heejin looked at Taemin. Do you dispute these facts? Taemin stood. He looked uncomfortable with all the eyes on him. I do not dispute what I did. I saw a child who was distressed about a broken toy. I had the skills to fix it. So I fixed it and returned it. I meant no disrespect. But you were not asked to perform this repair? No, Administrator. And you were aware that Vraxi culture values independence in their youth? Taemin hesitated. I learned this after I had already taken the toy. But I do not think it would have changed my actions. Murmurs rippled through the observers. Heejin raised her hand for silence. Why would you not change your actions if you knew they might be culturally inappropriate? Taemin took a breath. Because the cub's distress was real. Culture is important, but so is kindness. I saw a child suffering over something I could easily fix. Not fixing it seemed wrong. Rixtal stood again without being called on. This is exactly the problem. The human places his own judgment above our cultural practices. He decided what was best for my son without any authority or knowledge of our ways. Heejin gestured for Rixtal to sit. She turned to Taemin. Do you have anything else to add? Taemin looked at Rixtal, then at the observers, then back at Heejin. May I ask Diplomat Rixtal a question? Heejin nodded. If the diplomat permits it. Rixtal's spines flattened slightly, a sign of wariness, but he nodded. Taemin turned to face the Vraxi diplomat directly. The toy. Where did it come from? Rixtal's expression tightened. That is not relevant. I think it is, Taemin said quietly. Your son's reaction when he found the toy repaired was not just relief. It was joy. That toy meant something special to him. I am guessing it was a gift from someone important. Silence filled the room. Rixtal's hands clenched on the table. When he spoke, his voice was strained. It was from my mate. She made it for Kip before she died. The observers stirred. Even those unfamiliar with Vraxi culture understood the weight of that information. Taemin nodded slowly. Then my question is this. Would your mate have wanted that gift to cause your son shame? Would she have wanted him to hide it and suffer because it was broken? Or would she have wanted it to bring him comfort and connection to her memory? The question hung in the air. Rixtal's spines vibrated and his jaw worked as if he was grinding his teeth. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his shoulders sagged slightly. She would have wanted him to be strong, Rixtal said, but his voice lacked conviction. Strong enough to handle a broken toy, Taemin agreed. But your son is also dealing with loss. I lost my grandfather 3 years ago. He taught me everything I know about fixing things. If something he made for me broke, I would want it repaired, not abandoned. I would want to keep that connection. I think your son felt the same way about his mother's gift. Bora stood from the observer section. Administrator, may I speak? Heejin nodded. Bora stepped forward. I study interspecies relations. One thing I have learned is that every culture has blind spots. Things they cannot see clearly because they are too close to them. The Vraxi value strength and independence. These are good values. But perhaps in this situation those values were causing harm instead of building strength. Rixtal turned to her. You suggest our culture is flawed? No, Bora said carefully. I suggest that no culture is perfect for every situation. Vraxi culture has created strong, honorable people. But human culture has also created strong people through different methods. We believe that accepting help is not weakness. We believe that community and support make us stronger, not weaker. Another observer stood. This was Elder Thel, a Centauran diplomat known for his wisdom. His large frame and deep voice commanded attention. If I may offer perspective, Centauran culture also values repair and restoration. We believe that fixing what is broken shows respect for the maker's original intent. When my granddaughter broke her learning tablet, I repaired it because the tablet represented her parents' hope for her education. I did not repair it because she was weak. I repaired it because the object was valuable and deserved preservation. More observers began speaking up. A Quilix engineer mentioned that his species considered repair to be one of the highest skills. An Etherian merchant said their culture believed waste was the true failure, not broken objects. The conversation expanded beyond the original complaint. Heejin listened to all of it, then raised her hand for silence again. Diplomat Rixtal, I understand your concern. Cultural practices should be respected. But I am struggling to identify actual harm caused by maintenance worker Taemin's actions. Your son's property was taken temporarily, then returned in better condition. No damage occurred. Your son appears happy with the result. What specific harm are you claiming? Rixtal stood silent for a long moment. The harm is to his development. He should have learned to handle the problem himself. Or, Elder Thel said gently, he learned that kindness exists in unexpected places. That lesson may be valuable as well. Rixtal turned to look at the observers, then back at Hyojin. His spine slowly lowered. I want what is best for my son. I want him to be strong like his mother was. Like our people are. I do not want him to become weak or dependent. Taemin spoke softly. I understand. But I do not think one repaired toy will make him weak. And I do not think asking for or accepting help when you truly need it is weakness. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you cannot handle everything alone. Something shifted in Rixtal's expression. He looked at Taemin with less anger and more confusion. This is truly how humans think? That accepting help is strength? Not always, Taemin admitted. We value independence too. But we also value community. We believe we are stronger together than apart. My grandfather used to say that humans survived not because we were the strongest or fastest, but because we helped each other. That cooperation is in our nature. Rixtal sat down heavily. He looked at his hands, then at the table. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. Kip was very sad after his mother died. I tried to teach him strength, to honor her memory by being what she would have wanted. But perhaps I have been too hard. Perhaps I have been so focused on making him strong that I forgot he is still a cub. The admission seemed to cost him greatly. Vraxi rarely showed vulnerability, especially in public. Heejin recognized the courage it took for Rixtal to speak these words. Diplomat, Heejin said gently. Do you wish to continue with this complaint? Rixtal was quiet for a long time. Then he shook his head. No, I withdraw the complaint. The human acted from kindness. I may not agree with his methods, but his intent was not malicious. Heejin nodded. Then I declare this matter closed. However, I want to make something clear to all residents. Haven's Gate hosts dozens of species with different cultures and values. We will encounter situations where our practices conflict. When this happens, we must assume good intent and seek understanding rather than jumping to accusations. Maintenance worker Taemin, you acted with kindness. In the future, perhaps consult with me or another administrator before taking such actions. Diplomat Rixtal, you acted to protect your culture and your son. Both of you showed the values of your respective peoples. She looked around the room. We are all learning to live together. 3 months passed on Haven's Gate Station and life continued its normal rhythm. Ships arrived and departed. Diplomats held meetings. Trade deals were negotiated. The daily operations of hosting multiple species went on without major incidents, but small things had changed in ways that most people did not immediately notice. Taemin's workshop became busier. It started small. A Quilix engineer stopped by to ask questions about human repair techniques. Then a Centauran parent brought a broken learning device and asked if Taemin could fix it. Word spread that the human maintenance worker was good at repairing things and, more importantly, that he did not judge people for having broken possessions. The workshop that had been Taemin's quiet refuge now saw regular visitors. He did not mind. Most days he worked alone on his maintenance duties, but in the evenings, people came with various items needing repair. Taemin fixed what he could and learned new techniques from the aliens who visited. The Quilix engineer, whose name was Niktor, taught him about crystal weaving. A Centauran scholar named Sar showed him preservation methods for organic materials. Even Bora stopped by more often, bringing broken equipment from the xenobiology lab. The most regular visitor was Kip. The Vraxi cub appeared almost every evening, watching Taimin work. At first he just observed from the doorway. Then he moved closer. Eventually he asked questions. Taimin answered patiently, showing the young Vraxi how different tools worked and explaining the principles behind various repairs. Rixtal permitted these visits. The Vraxi diplomat had been true to his word about learning human practices. He and Taimin had several long conversations about raising children. Rixtal remained skeptical of some human approaches, but he listened. More importantly, he noticed that Kip seemed happier. The cub carried his striker toy with pride and talked more openly about his mother. The sadness that had surrounded him had not disappeared, but it had lifted somewhat. One evening, Taimin was working on a complicated repair. A Centauran crystal lamp had cracked and he was carefully reassembling it using techniques Niktor had taught him. Kip sat on a stool nearby, watching with intense focus. "Why do you fix things for free?" Kip asked suddenly. Taimin looked up from his work. "What do you mean?" "You do not charge anyone. People offer to pay you, but you refuse. Why?" Taimin thought about the question. "I have my job. The station pays me for maintenance work. This," he gestured at the lamp, "is different. This is helping people with things that matter to them. Charging for that would feel wrong. But it takes your time," Kip said. "Time is valuable. True, but some things are more valuable than money or time. Making someone happy because I fixed something they care about, that feels good. That is worth more to me than payment." Kip's spines flattened in the way they did when he was thinking hard. "Fraxi do not think this way. We believe everything has a price. Everything is a trade." "Nothing wrong with that," Taimin said. "Different species, different values. But your way seems—" Kip struggled for words. "It seems nicer," Taimin smiled. "Both ways work. Vraxi are strong and successful. Humans are also strong and successful. We just got there through different paths." The cub was quiet for a while, watching Taimin's hands carefully piece together the crystal. Then he said, "Father talks about you sometimes. He does not understand you, but he respects you. That is good. I respect him too." "He is trying to be less strict with me," Kip said softly. "He still wants me to be strong, but now he also asks me if I'm happy. He never did that before." Taimin paused in his work to look at the cub. "And are you?" "Happy," Kip nodded. "More than I was. I still miss Mother, but it does not hurt as much as it did." "That is good," Taimin said gently. "Grief gets easier with time. It never goes away completely, but it becomes something you can carry without it breaking you." The conversation drifted to other topics, and Kip eventually left to return to his quarters. Taimin finished the crystal lamp and set it aside for the owner to collect. He was cleaning his workspace when Bora appeared in the doorway. "Working late again," she said. "The lamp needed to be ready for tomorrow," Taimin replied. Bora came in and leaned against the work table. "You know you have become something of a celebrity on the station. People talk about you. That makes me uncomfortable. I know, but it is true. You did something small and kind and it grew into something bigger. Other species are paying attention to how humans behave. You are teaching them about us whether you mean to or not." Taimin frowned. "I am just fixing things. That is all. To you, maybe. To them, you are demonstrating human values. Compassion, community, helping without expecting reward. These concepts are not new to the galaxy, but humans practice them in ways that other species find unusual." Before Taimin could respond, Rixtal appeared in the doorway. The Vraxi diplomat looked uncomfortable, as if he was not sure he should be there. "Maintenance worker Taimin," Rixtal said formally. "May I speak with you?" "Of course," Taimin replied. Bora took the hint and left, nodding to both of them on her way out. Rixtal entered the workshop and stood awkwardly for a moment. Then he said, "I need your help with something." "It is a matter of some importance, and what is it?" Rixtal reached into his jacket and pulled out an object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing an old weapon. It was a blade, curved and decorated with intricate carvings. The metal was beautiful but clearly damaged. A crack ran through the center and pieces were missing from the handle. "This belonged to Elder Wierzkal," Rixtal explained. "He is the oldest Vraxi representative in the assembly. This blade is over 400 years old, passed down through his family line. It was damaged during transport to Haven's Gate. The case was dropped and the blade struck the ground. Taman examined the weapon carefully. The damage was significant. "This is beyond my skill alone," he said honestly. "I know metals and crafting, but this is Vraxi work. I do not understand the cultural significance or the traditional methods." "I know," Rixtal said. "That is why I am asking for collaboration, not just repair. I know Vraxi metalworking, but I do not have your skill with restoration." Elder Weirskal is devastated. "Normally, we would retire the blade with honor, but if there is a chance to save it..." Taman looked at the Vraxi diplomat with surprise. "You want us to work on this together?" "Yes, if you are willing. What about your cultural practices? About accepting help?" Rixtal's spines lowered. "I am learning that some things are more important than pride. This blade represents centuries of Elder Weirskal's family history. If there is a chance to preserve it, I must try, even if that means asking a human for assistance." Taman nodded slowly. "I will help, but Elder Weirskal should be involved too. He knows the blade better than either of us. His knowledge will be essential." Over the following weeks, the three of them worked together in Taman's workshop. Elder Weirskal was an ancient Vraxi with faded red skin and spines worn smooth by time. He moved slowly, but his mind was sharp. He shared stories about the blade and his ancestors who had carried it. He explained the meanings behind each carving and the techniques used to forge the metal. Taman contributed his restoration knowledge. He showed them how to stabilize cracks without compromising the original structure. He taught them about materials that could be used to fill gaps while maintaining the aesthetic of the original work. Rixtal provided the metalworking expertise, shaping and forging replacement pieces using traditional Vraxi methods. The work was slow and meticulous. Other station residents heard about the project and came to observe or offer help. Niktor provided a rare crystalline adhesive that was stronger than any known metal bonding agent but remained invisible after application. Tsar brought preservation compounds that would protect the ancient metal from further deterioration. Even some human engineers stopped by to offer suggestions or just to watch. The workshop became a gathering place. People from different species worked side by side on various projects. A Centauran taught humans about their philosophy of restoration. Aquilic showed Vraxi cubs how to repair torn fabric using crystal threads. Species that had existed in the same galaxy for centuries but rarely cooperated found themselves sharing techniques and knowledge. Administrator Hiejin visited one day and stood in the doorway, watching the activity. She found Bora standing nearby and said, "This is remarkable. 3 months ago we were holding hearings about cultural interference. Now we have spontaneous cooperation across species lines." Bora smiled. "Humans have a talent for building communities. We do it almost unconsciously." "It started with a broken toy," Eugene said thoughtfully. "One small act of kindness." "The best things usually start small," Bora replied. The blade restoration took 6 weeks. When they finished, Elder Weirskal held the weapon with shaking hands. The crack had been repaired with such skill that you could barely see where it had been. The missing pieces had been replaced with such care that they looked like original parts. The blade was whole again, perhaps even stronger than before. Elder Weirskal looked at Tamin, then at Rixtal, then at all the people who had contributed to the work. His old eyes were bright with emotion. "In Vraxi culture," he said slowly, "we believe that broken things lose their value. We honor them and retire them.